Today we're talking about one of the biggest challenges probably across most real estate transactions, the home inspection process. Today we're going to deconstruct it, demystify it, and hopefully reduce stress for everyone involved. All right, Chris, so today we're talking about, sometimes we call it the necessary evil of a real estate transaction. Sometimes it's referred to as the bane of the real estate transaction. This notion of the home inspection. And the challenge with the home inspection is that it's usually uncovering problems. And problems tend to lead to stress in a real estate transaction. So we want to talk about that a little bit, about what it means for buyers, what it means for sellers, the implications, the framework of the contract, what's happening in a home inspection, and then how do you kind of solve it? Because at the end of the day, we rarely see that the home inspection breaks a deal apart. But what we often see is that it creates a fair amount of friction. So let's kind of go after it. Let's think about your typical home inspection. Let's just pick a single family home. What's a home inspector? What are they doing? What's their objective? They're hired typically by the buyer once we're under contract, and now they're on site. What are they typically looking at?
Well, they're hired to go and just find things. They are hired to find problems. They are hired to crawl into areas that we might not normally crawl into.
Correct.
Their eyes are trained to look for trigger signs or triggers. This could be wrong or that could be wrong. They'll probe into things. They will test electrical. They'll test plumbing. They will look for anything that is a problem, could be a problem, maybe wasn't constructed correctly. All of that sort of thing. So they're all over the place. They're looking inside the house. They're looking outside the house. They're looking up on the roof.
Underneath.
They're looking underneath the house. They're looking underneath the decks. And all of that sort. They're looking how close are the trees to the house. I mean, anything that you could think of that could be a potential problem, that's their job, is to find it.
Yeah, to basically assess the structure, the systems, the basic components of this property, not even just typically the structure itself, but they may be looking at the pool, or if there's a dock, or if there's other components of it that they're going to be studying that as well. And there may be limitations to what they're doing
even
too.
The irrigation system. I mean, just whatever a house has, they're going to put their eyes on it.
Yeah, and when I think inspector, I think about like the eyeglass, right? But these guys and gals are using sophisticated equipment, basically to go about their process. They're oftentimes around here. The moisture meter is a very active piece of equipment in their process.
Yes.
If they're looking at something that they think, oh, maybe there's a leak there, or maybe that looks like wood rot. Is that active, or is that an old stain in sheetrock? That kind of thing is what they're kind of looking for.
Doors, windows, egress, all that sort of stuff. But, as much as they're crawling, and there's talented guys and gals in this industry, and they know so much about houses, they're not going to fix something. So even though they're crawling around and looking at everything, if they see something that's maybe it's just a quick screwdriver and you fixed it, they're not going to repair it. Right. They're just going to report it.
Which can be frustrating because you're like, oh my gosh, and we're going to talk about the seller side in a second. When they receive that report, like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd known. There can be a little bit of a benefit sometimes for a seller to be present. They know the house really well because the home inspector doesn't know the house, first time on property. So the homeowner might say, oh, that's operated with this switch over here.
You're such a great point. And home inspectors don't have to be by themselves. They don't mind a seller being there because they might have a question. I mean, they might want to know where's the shutoff valve for the gas or anything like that. You might be able to add some value and really help a report as opposed to seeing in the report, oh, I couldn't find the shutoff valve, so I don't know one exists.
Yeah, it's all about getting informed about the property. And so if you've got someone who's not interfering in that process, but is maybe aiding in it, that's great. And then likewise, sometimes we find buyers will attend home inspections as well. And I think what I've generally heard from the home inspector is best case on that is, let me do my job. Right. Why don't you come in the last half an hour, and I'd be kind of glad to hit the highlight reel on what I found.
And I've seen home inspectors go so far as after they've completed the report and sent it, buyers can call them. Buyers can ask them questions about it. Especially the inspectors that we have around here are awesome, and they will engage with a buyer and they'll answer questions. And they might something that might come across in the report is, oh my gosh, is that is that just terrible? Is this the worst thing that could be? They might calm them down a little bit and say, it's not, this is something we typically see, and it's actually something that can be fixed.
So here's the thing that can be, let's call that the scary category. Some of the scary part is that these reports, I'll date myself way back when there was just one typewritten page of 7 items that were found. It's not uncommon for these inspection reports, when they come out, to be over 100 pages long. They contain so much more information than they used to. Right. It's not just a one sentence about an issue. It aims to be educational. It might pull in reference to an article or an FYI. It's got photographs. The inspection company might have language that they like to add in. And sometimes I see that the home inspection report isn't just about all these problems. Sometimes it's FYI. Hey, by the way, I happen to notice this. This is something you're going to want to keep an eye on, or this is something that we found through time needs regular maintenance. Not a problem today. And so I think it's really meant to be much more of a hands-on guide for someone who's looking to buy this home, who is buying this home, to know what the current condition is, and also maybe things to be mindful of as they're going to move forward.
You bring up a great point, because they also introduce a lot of information about a house. So they'll look at a tag on an HVAC system or water heater, and they'll be able to decipher maybe the year built and things, the age of these things, and then they'll go so far as to say, okay, this is 8 years old. The anticipated life expectancy of this type of unit is this. And here's a link to a recall that happened to this one that I found.
Yeah, it's operating fine, but this is something to consider. Or something just as simple as, hey, this is the size of the filter that goes in the air handler. Yeah. So it's just really meant to be educational. So I think that taking the scare out of it, because here's the problem, shifting to the buyer side, is that you get the inspection report, and you're so excited about the house, and then all of a sudden you get this report, and you're hoping it's perfect. And I'm here to tell you, there's rarely a perfect home inspection report. And why is that? That's because a lot of the things that are found aren't, if you found an inspection report, got an inspection report that said that there's a 6-foot hole in the middle of the foyer and nobody saw it when they were in the process of buying the house, that would be strange. Right? So typically what they're finding is something in the attic or something underneath, where typically you're not even in the home buying or even home owning process, you're not usually looking at those items. I mean, I don't know a lot of people that walk their whole perimeter, walk their whole crawl space, walk their whole attic, go in everything, check all the electronics every day. They don't do that. So oftentimes what the home inspector is doing is bringing to fruition and to knowledge what's happened and what's occurring in the house. And honestly, it shouldn't necessarily knock the shine off the penny for the buyer, because A, that's what they're paying for, and B, now they know what the condition is, and C, typically we can work through these issues.
But it is scary. And the reason it's scary is because they are identifying all these problems and they're taking a close-up picture of it. And guess what they're not including in the home inspection? All the shiny bells and whistles, all the great things that you fell in love with, none of that's talked about. It's only focused on the negatives and close-up focus. So we have seen buyers that are super excited about a property, get the report that's 100 pages and think, what have I done? What the heck did I just buy? And that's not the way we need to look at it.
And so then you take the same report, right? And now you're the seller. And maybe you've had this home for 20 years.
Right.
And it's worked perfectly for you. And you replaced the refrigerator and the dishwasher got repaired, and anything else that came up that you knew was a problem, you took care of. And now all of a sudden you're getting this report too. It's like, oh my gosh, what do I own? I had no idea. So it's this friction, it's this stress issue. And so what we find is that you got to go to the contract of sale, which has language that typically is stipulating what's normal wear and tear and what's more of a quote-unquote required repair. And what we tend to find is that just like no homes are alike, no home inspection reports are ever alike, there's always seemingly something new that comes up that nobody was anticipating. The contract language tries to generalize the approach. It tries to set expectations, but what we're all often finding is there's a lot of gray. There's a lot of gray, and it could be because the buyer's particularly concerned about something, or there's something that the seller thinks is not really, that's not an issue, it's no big deal, never been a problem for me. And so what we find is a lot of the coming together in the gray happens in our closings department with the agents communicating, etc., trying to make sure everybody kind of keeps it in perspective. And as I said at the beginning of the video, it always comes together.
It does. It comes together, but it really takes that third party. I mean, that's why it's so critical to have somebody on your team that knows how to navigate this
Yeah.
and knows how to look at the home inspection and break it down and say, okay, there's 100 pages or 200 pages, but here's 8 things that are probably need to be addressed between the buyer and seller. And guess what? Here's some resources, and we can actually navigate these 8 things. So we take a 100-page report and then break it down into things that really matter, and then have a discussion about how to best fix this and address this part of the contract.
And in most cases, in a lot of cases, it's a resale property, right? And so normal wear and tear is expected.
Yes.
But a few other components of it, we are advocating on new construction getting a home inspection.
100%.
Right? So even if you think, oh, it's brand new, it's got to be perfect, get a home inspection because nobody's perfect. For some sellers, get a pre-sale home inspection. What does that mean? It's like, well, let's get knowledgeable. Let's get educated about it before we go on the market. Let's try to figure out if there are any issues. I'd rather know about it now than be surprised waiting when we have a contract and then that home inspector comes along.
That's great counsel. Think about it. If you're selling a house and you can identify the problems that might come up in advance, guess what you can do? You can either address them at your leisure with the contractors that you want to address them, or you might even be able to address it yourself and fix it.
Sure.
Or you know about it, and you at least in the negotiation phase, you know it might come up down the road, and so you can kind of be prepared for that. But once the buyer gets it, and once the buyer says, okay, these are the things, you can't go fix it yourself.
Correct. You got to get a contractor. You're under a construct of time on the contract. Knowledge is power a lot of times for sellers to kind of get that information up front, have a little bit of time and breathing room and opportunity to solve that. The only downside to a pre-sale home inspection is because once you become knowledgeable of a defect of the property, then you've either got to fix it or disclose it. But we have always found that the best real estate transactions typically involved a full disclosure, full knowledge, full covering of all the issues so that everybody's happy, and then that just keeps the stress down.
Right.
So that's pretty much how the home inspection process works. Appreciate you guys listening today, and as always, please make sure you're letting somebody know about this video series here on YouTube.